Outward's greatest challenge. 19 hidden arenas spread across all 6 regions. These secret bosses are only accessible after finishing the main quest line and will serve as the ultimate proving ground for your character build. These bosses, however, are not created equal. Some of them may be handled with a fair amount of ease, while others may push you far beyond what you can bear. Over the next few minutes, I will use my experience with each boss to compile what I believe to be an accurate, though subjective, list, ranking the bosses from easiest to hardest. Outward's easiest boss, the elite Mantis shrimp in the Chersonese, the Voltaic hatchery. This is basically a Mantis shrimp with a large health pool. His AoE attack is a bit more intense than your standard Mantis shrimp, but other than that, he shouldn't give you much trouble. Equip some lightning resistant armor, infuse your weapon with ice, and go to work. Next up we have the elite beast golem in the Abyssar Desert in the old shipwreck. His movesets and attack combinations will mimic those of the regular beast golems that you fought in the normal game, with the exception of one ranged attack, his multi-laser shot. As long as you remain in close combat, you will limit him to the standard movesets that you're already familiar with. Load up on physically protective armor, and you should have no problem outlasting this boss. Next on the list, we have the Ash Giant High Monk in the Ash Giant's village in Hollowed Marsh. This boss is only slightly more deadly than the High Monk that you'll see in the Abyssar Desert from time to time. Again, attack with frost damage, and if you're having difficulty, gear up with lightning resistant armor. Putting this guy down is not a difficult task for an experienced Outward player. At number 16, we have the Immaculate's Bird in the Antique Plateau in the Immaculate's Cave. This guy could actually pack quite a punch, but his lack of health combined with his low impact resistance makes him one of the easier bosses in the game. Be mindful of his ethereal AoE blast, as well as prismatic flurry, which, if he lands it, could take a large percentage off your health. He's fairly resistant to all elements, so just go with your highest damage dealer and hope for the best. Let's move to number 15, Squire Brand on the Conflux Mountain. Brand will attack with a quick one-hand sword moveset, and he'll also work in Perfect Strike on a regular basis. When at a distance, he'll send a shockwave of elemental damage across the floor. Avoid this at all costs. Wear frost-resistant armor, and dish out some decay damage to give yourself the best opportunity for victory. Next we have the Elite Buzu in the Antique Plateau, south of Mana Lake. The Elite Buzu behaves much like your standard Buzu, just on a more aggressive scale. He's going to be dishing out a lot of ethereal damage, so make sure you gear up against that. As far as your weapon, infuse it with fire or lightning. At number 13, we have the Elite Torcrab in the Caldera region in the River of Red. Stay in close combat with the crab and you'll avoid most of his elemental attacks. Infuse your weapon with frost, and you should be able to make fairly quick work of him. Number 12, the Elite Sublime Shell, Antique Plateau. Again, many of these endgame bosses are not much different than the normal game counterparts, with the exception of an increased health pool and increased damage in their attacks. If you get to a place where you can handle the regular Sublime Shells out in the plateau, you should have no problem dealing with this guy. Infuse your weapon with lightning, and make sure you've got strong resistance to corruption. If you allow yourself to become defiled in the arena, your lightning damage will take a huge hit. You may want to consume an Innocence Potion before entering in. Coming in at number 11 on the list, we have the Elite Gargoyles in the Caldera in New Sirocco on the lower city level. Normally when you talk about multiple enemies in these unknown arenas, you're talking about a huge spike in difficulty. The one saving grace about this arena, however, is you are able to attack one gargoyle at a time, dealing with each one and then healing up as needed after each fight. Being able to approach this boss in this manner makes it so much more manageable for the player. The gargoyles are highly vulnerable to ethereal damage, so be sure to coat your weapon with spiritual varnish. Next up, we have the Immaculate Ascendant in the Enmerker Forest and the Cabal of Wind Temple. The Immaculate Ascendant differs from regular Immaculates in a couple of ways. One, it will deal an AoE of ethereal damage by driving the butt of its spear into the ground. And two, when there's separation created between you and the Immaculate, it will shoot an ethereal beam that you're going to want to avoid at all costs. To avoid seeing his ranged attack, make sure you stay in close combat with the Immaculate, and he will shy away from using it. At that point, you can treat him like a regular Immaculate with the exception of the AoE blast that you must be aware of. If you're struggling, make sure you gear up in ethereal resistant armor, as well as coat your weapon with spiritual varnish or a bolt varnish, as he is vulnerable to both elements. Coming in at number 9, we have the Troglodyte Queen and her minions in the Chersonese and the Blister Burrow. The high number of enemies in this arena creates for a difficulty spike that the player will feel. Your internal stress will most likely rise to a somewhat chaotic level. Make sure you control that. I suggest a systematic approach to the arena. I highly suggest going after the Troglodyte Grenadiers first, eliminating them so they can no longer poison you. Then onto the armored Troglodytes, and then the Trog Mages, and lastly, get at the Queen. Her most devastating attack will be Decay Blast that she shoots from her scepter. The best way to avoid these is to stay on the move, circling her, coat your weapon with lightning, gear up against decay damage, and try not to panic. At number 8, we have the Grandmother's Arena in the Caldera, the Tower of Regrets. The Grandmother's Arena has a lot to deal with. Although you're only fighting 2 enemies, essentially, the Mage and the Warrior, both will throw quite a bit at you. You'll need to constantly be on the lookout for tripwire traps, grenades, and a devastating lightning bolt from the Mage. This arena has the most interesting mechanic in that the Grandmother will heal both the Mage and the Knight after you've gotten their health to 0. One can easily be put into a panic if they're not understanding what's happening. The Witch and the Warrior combined deal multiple types of elemental damage, so it's difficult to narrow down what you want your resistances to be. I would probably suggest decay resistance for the grenades that the Warrior throws, as well as lightning resistance for the bolt that the Mage will drop. Next up, we have the elite Alphatonosaur in the Hollowed Marsh and the Ziggurat Passage. This guy's a bit of a beast. He'll set you aflame from range with his fireballs, and he'll inflict extreme bleeding when you decide to go toe-to-toe with him. He'll exhibit the same movesets as your standard Alphatonosaur, with the exception of his ranged fireball. So I suggest getting a few practice rounds in with some of the alphas in the Hollowed Marsh. He's got a ridiculous amount of health, so it's going to be difficult for you to outlast him. I highly suggest trying to inflict pain in some way at the beginning of the fight, so that he takes increased damage with every hit thereafter. Infuse your weapon with frost and step into that arena. Coming in at number 6, we have the elite Fireman and the 2 Obsidian Elementals. This fight is one that will become extremely chaotic very early. One must quickly deal with the Obsidian Elementals and leave only the Burning Man to deal with. One thing that can make this fight exponentially easier is to gear up in fire-resistant armor, as that's really the only elemental damage that will be dealt. But seeing as how I didn't change my armor set throughout these boss fights, one can understand why I have them high on this list. The Burning Man himself will enter a second phase of sorts when his health gets to a certain point, causing him to be even more aggressive than he was at first. I think it goes without saying, but I guess I'll say it anyways, coat your weapon with ice and get at it. Now we step into the top 5 most difficult bosses in Outward, and at number 5, I'm going to go with the Plague Doctor and the Light Mender duo in the Blue Chamber building in Berg. This pair can be an absolute mess if you're not equipped with the Entomber set. The Entomber armor is the only set in Outward that resists against both decay and lightning, the exact elements that you'll be focused on in this battle. Without that sterling resistance, this duo will push you to the brink. The Light Mender will be aggressive, attacking you from up close, while the Plague Doctor sends his tentacles of decay out to get you. One must constantly be aware of 2 simultaneous attacks going on at once. Get some frost on your weapon to deal with the Light Mender, and then switch over to Bolt Varnish for the Plague Doctor. And good luck, because you're going to need it. Or just wear the Entomber set. Should be fine. Rolling in at number 4, we have the elite Ash Giants in the Hollowed Marsh in the Giants Village. Now for a tank build, these guys may not be too bad, but for my tiny dancer, it was highly stressful, highly chaotic, and I barely made it out alive. None of the Giants' moves will surprise you if you're familiar with the Ash Giant moveset, but when dealing with all 3 of them, things can become a bit tricky. The smallest of the 3 is the quickest, and the largest is the slowest. All of them deal only physical damage, so get your protection levels up, get your resistances up, and all of them are vulnerable to fire. Coat that weapon or drop that fire sigil if you're a mage, and go to work. At number 3, most difficult bosses in Outward, we have Calixa, who has ascended to a goddess in Levant. What makes Calixa so difficult to deal with is that she deals all sorts of elemental damage. You're not going to be able to gear up in a fashion that resists her attacks. She dishes out the full spectrum of elemental attacks, so you're going to have to just pick an element to resist and go with that. And as far as your weapon goes, she's not vulnerable to anything in particular. You're going to simply have to outlast her. Again, inflicting pain early is something that I think you're going to want to do. Calixa is very quick, and she'll put you on the floor time and again with her shield charge. She has a ton of health, and she's relentless in her attacks. She can be a flat-out nightmare. But enter the dream, and I hope you wake up alive. 2 bosses remain. The Elite Crimson Avatar, as well as the Elite Crescent Sharks. Which is most difficult? Which has made me toss and turn in my sleep? In my humble opinion, the most difficult boss in all of Outward are the Elite Crescent Sharks in the Abyssar Desert in the Electric Lab. The levels of chaos that you experience over the course of this fight will reach unprecedented heights. At multiple points during this fight, it is highly likely that you'll not even be able to see your character, as the flurry of sharks twirling around you blocks your view. Though each shark bite will not take a lot off of your health, all 3 of the sharks together are absolutely relentless in their attacks. And although you could gear up in ethereal resistant armor to give yourself the best shot, oftentimes during the course of the fight, your armor will become badly damaged and or broken, negating the resistances. The player needs to infuse their weapon with fire and set these sharks aflame to get some damage over time going. As soon as you can down one of these sharks, things get exponentially easier and much more manageable. But until that point, you're in for quite a ride. So there you have it, all 19 Outward bosses ranked from easiest to hardest. What are your thoughts on it? I'm sure everyone's list is different. Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching.